Hi, everybody. This is Angela Young Smucker. I am Executive Director of Third Coast Baroque, and it's Third Coast Thursday. This is our fourth live stream and our second Thursday episode. If you aren't familiar with Third Coast Baroque, we are a performing arts ensemble in Chicago, Illinois, specializing in 17th and 18th century music. And our mission is to share the aesthetic of Baroque music while unlocking its relevance for today's audiences, which just means we want people to understand how everybody and almost everything can be connected to this incredible musical heritage. So I'm so glad you're with us today. If you want to go ahead and say hello in the comments, and you can put questions in there. Hi, John. John's here. I'm going to bring on my guest today, who is Dan Pyne. We all know Dan Pyne. Hi, Dan.
Hello, world.
So Dan was the founding board president for Third Coast Baroque, and he very bravely stepped up before Third Coast was even a real thing, before we even had our first event. And I said, hey, I think you should be a part of this. And Dan said,
okay, why not? How can anyone resist Angela? When Angela asks you something, you just say yes.
Oh, man. All right, well, I got to think about that. I have to use those powers for good and not evil.
She will, yes.
Well, Dan, thanks so much for joining me today. How are things going with you?
Oh, things are going great, all things considered. Here we are sheltering in place, and we've figured out ways to make life continue through virtuosity, Zoom, and other devices. Like all of us, this has been a bit of a setback in terms of our ability to do the things that we normally do in person. But I really think it's important to just keep our spirits up and keep a positive outlook because this too shall pass.
Indeed. There will be an after. We don't know what it'll look like exactly.
We don't exactly know when, but and we've also been waiting for some warmer weather, which I think will lift the spirits.
Yes.
And we might get some snow later today, but I think after that, that's it.
Okay.
It's going to be sunshine and warmer days.
Good. Well, it's a wonderful day to have you here. And I wanted first of all, I wanted our community to get to know you a little bit. For those who have sort of followed Third Coast Baroque from the beginning, I'm sure they met you because you were a great cheerleader and still are a great cheerleader for TCB, often getting up to speak during our concerts and at events. But I wanted to ask you, besides me saying, hey, I really think this is a good idea and I think you should do it, what inspired you to say yes and to get involved with Third Coast Baroque?
Right. I think, it starts with I have always had a love for Baroque music.
Mm-hmm.
I remember probably 15, maybe 20 years ago, my mother got me for my birthday a ticket to go see Handel Week out in Oak Park. And that was, many moons before I met Kimberly, who's performed with the Handel Week Festival a number of times. So I've always really, the music speaks to me. And I've gotten to be fairly involved in the musical arts. As you know, I've been a long time supernumerary at Lyric Opera. I've been involved because I'm passionate about live music. I got involved, years ago with Lyric Opera. I was a member of their Young Professionals Auxiliary Board, which then became the auxiliary chapter. And I was actually the founding treasurer for that chapter, which is still around today. Mm-hmm. So it's just, that's the interest has just blossomed over the years as, I got more involved, and especially, doing the stage work.
Mhm.
And then, we had that memorable conversation that I had no idea I was being sort of silently recruited at the time. It was after, as you may recall, La Callisto, Haymarket Opera
Yeah.
production that you were featured in, and Kimberly was also in it. And
Mhm.
we went to a bar across the street from the Athenaeum Theater, and I
Mhm.
started waxing poetic about, how art is so vitally important to our society. And I do believe firmly in that still today.
Mhm.
And as I was, pontificating on that uh, to our table of artists who it was really, frankly, preaching to the choir. Um,
Yeah.
I remember you leaned over to me and said, we should talk sometime. Would you like,
Uh-huh.
do lunch? And I was like, yeah, sure. It's like we could talk now, but like lunch. I'm like, what is this all about? And so at that point, I did not know about Third Coast Baroque. I think you had gotten it incorporated, but it hadn't been publicly announced, and it sounded like a great thing uh, to do.
Yeah, well, so for me, one of the things that struck me about you was, um, I knew that you had an understanding of Baroque music, and I knew that you also had an understanding of business because you also ran your own business at that time. You still do, um, uh, and I I think if you, as our Chicago super fan, Dan, for
Oh,
people who've never been in an audience with Dan Pyne has one of the best bravies in the business. You will recognize it the second whatever piece is going, the second it's done and it's time to applaud and cheer. That bravi, that's what seals the deal for me, man.
I am a professional audience member. You remember
It's important.
the opera, the wedding? There was a character who he was a professional guest. He was invited, I believe, like he was invited to just
Like a
be,
seat filler.
yeah, like a wedding crasher, which I have done. It's when I was a wee bairn, but
A wee battern.
the but really I feel in deference to the performers. I think it's so important, having been on the stage myself in my limited capacity. There's a certain energy between the audience and the performers, and
Mhm.
the performers can really feel that energy. How they interpret the audience responding to what they're doing on stage.
Mhm.
And it's really, I think especially, well, with music, but also with drama and any sort of public performance, you're really, as an artist, putting yourself out there on the line. And especially with singing, it's very much exposing yourself. It's
Mhm.
very naked, so to speak.
Mhm.
And so I just want the artists to know that I personally really appreciate what they're doing and how they're putting themselves out there. It's not, this is not a job. I mean, it's a job, but it's also a calling, I believe.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
Well,
I think it's
and
important to,
I
yeah.
yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And it's, as somebody who's been on stage on both sides, I mean, you have as well. I mean, you can tell when you have different kinds of energies coming from the audience. And I don't know, maybe we'll have to have some audience master classes led by Dan Pyne, Chicago superfan.
Well, what happens is I think that I have found, I mean, I can say now that I am a professional audience member, and I have seen, like, for example, an event comes to mind,
Mhm.
Tannhauser at Lyric Operas, whatever it was, 4 or 5 years ago.
Mhm.
We had upgraded our seats to like the second row, and at the end of the opera, which is, I love Wagner, and I just was cheering bravo, bravi, brava
Mhm.
very loudly, probably more loudly than was needed, seeing as how I was in the second row. But that got people around me who I think wanted to express their feelings. It's not just a feeling of joy; it's a feeling. It's a multifaceted feeling, and they started to really,
Join
and,
in.
and there have been times when I have turned around in the theater and I will go like this, like, come
Yes.
on, get up.
Yes.
You've been sitting for 5 hours, now is the time to let people know. But that particular performance of Tannhäuser was where I met Eugenia Chang, who is also very involved in the local art scene.
Yeah.
And she was in the second row, I believe, but a few aisles, like 2 aisles down. And she was crying. She had tears in her eyes. And I said, "Are you okay?" This is after the curtain came down. And she had told me that somebody had admonished her for doing her bravies.
Yeah,
And
she's also a wonderful vocal audience member. I love it.
She is. So that was the beginning of a friendship. So that's how we met. And we agreed that we would support each other in applause. If we happen to be at a performance on the same day and time. So, but yeah, that is super important to just to recognize. I think in a very general term, it's just recognizing what the artists have given you emotionally.
Yeah.
And the bravo, the cheering is just the way that our society does that.
Oh, I love it. I absolutely love it. Well, and I can tell you that it definitely carries across the footlights and onto the stage because, especially in Wagner. I mean, my goodness, you're up there like doing a workout for 5 hours.
Yes.
You want to know when, okay?
Yes, indeed.
Indeed. Well, so let's get back to you saying yes to TCB. All right. So this was very early on. People may not be aware, but the origin of Third Coast Baroque was very swift. We were incorporated at the end of April in 2016. We were able to acquire our tax-exempt nonprofit status at the beginning of May of 2016. And then at the beginning of June 2016, we had our very first kickoff event. Dan, obviously you were there, and this was our first sort of fundraiser, awareness builder, little mini house concert that was so graciously hosted by Craig Trumpeter and David Rice of Haymarket Opera Company. We're all big family here. But so can you talk about that experience of that very first event, what you thought about or what you felt?
The very first event, well, Craig is a great person, Craig and David, and having them hosting it was also great. I felt like the event went very well, and that was, but at the end of it, I was like, okay, that was great. We got some of the Haymarket supporters who are naturally going to, be interested in Third Coast Baroque because it's a similar genre of music. But then, we started talking, you and I, immediately about, following up with the donors. We did get a couple of donations straight out of that to help us get started, and then planning our, first concert series.
Yeah, which was, so that was the beginning of June, and our first concert series was the following beginning of November. It
Right.
was around Election Day, 2016.
Yeah.
Yeah. But actually, for 1 second, I want to share. I have some photos of you from that. From that event. I love them.
I'm like, come on, guys.
Yeah.
Let's make it happen.
So this is Dan in his natural environment,
Right.
telling people why they should support this organigation and these folks and these artists. I love it. I love it. I absolutely.
Natalie is looking at me and the other one like, who is this guy?
She's like, no, man, that is firm, silent support. Oh my gosh, I love it. But yeah, that first performance, that first event. Yeah, I remember sort of regrouping after that and thinking, oh my gosh, this is real now. What have we done?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think we should maybe spend a few minutes just to sort of share with our audience the kind of heavy lift it is to get an arts organization off the ground. I mean,
Oh yeah.
we hear about how arts organizations are suffering, but let's just step back for a moment and think. We're starting a music group in Chicago, which is a major market, but we're not the only, this is not going to be the first music group in Chicago.
Right.
We are focusing on a genre of music that is, let's be honest, not mainstream.
Right.
And, you know, we had, like many organizations that get started, no money.
Right.
So that is really a heavy lift. But it's also exciting. And if you believe that this needs to happen, and I believe that you believed and still believe that intensely, that was what sold me. I think I even told you this back in the day, that your passion, I had no doubt that if we could pull this off, we would be able to do so because you have this determination and this strength of will to just will it into existence. And I felt, you know, because when you come on as a board member, as a volunteer, I mean, no one was getting paid at the time on the artistic side. But I mean, you know, the idea is that you are volunteering your time, which of course for a lot of us is in short supply. But so if from my personal calculus was, if I'm gonna, you know, make that commitment, I'm not gonna do it half-heartedly. Because that's just not the way I operate. I'm either all in or I'm not in. You know, I'm just being an audience member. So, but I felt like with you at the helm, and that was even before I met Ruben. And
right.
Ruben, I was like, oh yeah, you know, I think we've got great people at the helm, and of course I already knew some of the other artists who were going to be involved. And I think that you put together a great team of volunteers, and also was it Josh who helped out with the website?
Yeah.
And helped us get that other event that we did at the Main Street Metro station. Which
at the Old Piccolo Theater.
Old Piccolo Theater.
Yeah.
So I really felt like, you know, it's like anything in business too. You know, is your product or service relevant? And I believe that Baroque music is relevant. And I think that the type of the approach that Third Coast Baroque takes is really very much engaging directly the audience in, you know, all aspects of it. You know, Ruben is, you know, giving a little bit of a history lesson and a musicology, but also doing it in a way that's not overly academic. So it's able to sort of, and speaking to the relevancy of today and why this music still speaks to us, and how, you know, some of the other music that we hear today has been influenced by it. All of that is part of the product of Third Coast Baroque. And I didn't know that at the time, but once I started seeing this come together, I was like, you know, I think that this really has you know, everything needed to sort of become something really great. And, you know, this is our 4th season. You know, small businesses, small non-for-profits, music organizations, I just want to just emphasize how hard it is, especially for business and for arts. The first 5 years of a small business, and we're just going to throw arts into that. Just think small business. You live and you die by the cash flow.
Yeah.
And this is kind of like a conventional wisdom of sorts and I am a product of small business. And, you know, it just seemed to be that after 5 years, back when I was in the computer software business, we had turned a corner, and we could feel that we had turned a corner. Like we were no longer almost running out, or like literally running out of money right before, you know, like we'd run payroll and then we'd be broke again until the next payroll.
Which is how, you know, that's kind of how in the early days you operate. You get the funds, you have the show, you pay everybody, and then it starts over again.
Right. And my focus, I wanted, you know this, but some of the folks listening might not know. that I really wanted to focus on putting butts in the seats.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that is something that arts organizations sometimes overlook. In fact, I know that they do because I've been involved with some other arts organizations where it just didn't seem like that was enough of a focus. And
Mm-hmm.
again, getting back to the importance of the audience interacting at an energy level with the performers,
Mm-hmm.
that there's something that takes place there. There's this exchange that takes place there, and it's important for there to be an audience. And
Yeah.
so selling tickets, is something that I really wanted to focus on, and the donations, fundraising equally
Right.
important.
Yeah, it's
Um,
all there. And to thinking about that energy in live performance and where we are right now, where we absolutely are not allowed to do it. But in its place right now, we're experiencing a lot of streaming performances, a lot of at home virtual music making, and we see a lot of these virtual choirs and orchestras, and some people don't realize when they see all these little boxes of faces playing Beethoven 9 or Bolero or singing a piece together, that's not happening simultaneously. It's not the same as what you would experience in a concert hall. Everybody's putting their little part individually, and it's creating something new. And there's music that's being created now that it has not necessarily been created before, or in this way before, that we've seen. So have you been able to experience any of the streaming performances that have been going on, or any of this virtual music making lately?
a few, but
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, and I prefer, when possible, again,
Mhm.
to be there for the live music, for the
Yeah.
live experience.
Hmm.
And yeah, I mean, this comes up a lot. Like, can a recording replace a live performance? Now, I have some nice recordings of all sorts of music that I listen to when I'm doing work at home, or
Hmm.
cleaning the kitchen or something like that. And it's
Absolutely.
great, and I'm so thrilled. I mean, YouTube, for example. I mean, if you wanted to, let's take Tannhäuser. I mean, you can listen to a multitude of recordings. Never
Look,
before.
I go back to 1976, Neil Diamond, Love at the Greek live concert. You feel the energy,
Yeah,
50 years later,
you do.
but it's not the same.
It's not. No, it's not. And again, I think that Third Coast Baroque, as a smaller music organization, is able to really connect with the audience. I mean, we have
Mhm.
done the meet and greets, the little receptions after the concerts. I really
Right.
like those. I think that's great to get to know the artists and just
Mhm.
speak to them as people.
Right.
Of course, asking any additional questions you want to ask about how were you able to pull that off, or what was the inspiration. But it makes it more real when you're
Mhm.
able to do that, and I really appreciate that it's very approachable.
Absolutely. Well, and right now we're also in venues that, they're not seating 2,000 and 3,000 people. These are seating, a few hundred people at the most. And so on that smaller scale, it allows us the possibility to have that dialogue in the concert and after the concert as well. And, this is another way that we try to continue that conversation. I see one of our viewers, Hudson, who's been with us before. Yeah, maybe not so much a fan of streaming all the time. I get it, Hudson. It's nice to have when you can't physically be there, and you want to be there. But yeah, I think when I think about streaming, when I think about watching concerts, I mean, that's going to be the same thing every single time. You know exactly what's going to happen. And for me, over time, I'll re-listen and maybe hear some other nuance I didn't catch before. But there is something so exciting about live performance that it just you can't replicate it.
Well, and I think too that at this time that we're living in, sheltering in place,
Hmm.
the economy as we've known it all of our lives, sort of on hold.
Hmm.
I feel like I am even more deeply appreciating the importance of face-to-face interaction.
Well,
And
and this
not
is
just with,
exactly what I was thinking. I was
yeah,
going to ask, how has this affected you? We talked about this a little bit, but it sounds like for you and maybe for others, it's making us really appreciate more these experiences, these live experiences.
like just thinking about my professional background. So
Hmm.
when I was in the software business, which was like 17 years,
Hmm.
I was the head of sales for our company, and we had a product that was a web-based software application. I could conduct and did, guided online demonstrations. So
Hmm.
the prospective customer would be looking at the screen, and I would be interacting with the software and have everyone on a conference call. And I remember when the technology started to allow for having more than one person. Originally the screen sharing was just a one-on-one thing.
Hmm.
And when that started to develop, like I was able to reach so many more people. But there all throughout that whole period, I was like, there is no substitute for an in-person meeting.
Hmm.
For example, I had just like we had gotten contacted by this university in Bogota, Colombia.
Okay.
They were developing like a performing arts center, film school, audio production, and our software was geared toward managing inventory.
Hmm.
So of course, they're in Bogota, we're in Chicago. We're going to start by doing some guided online demonstrations. And
Hmm.
at some point in this process, they said to me, Daniel, we really like your software. We think you're a really nice guy. We would like for you to come to Colombia and meet with us.
Okay.
And I was like, yeah, okay. And I went down there for a week and met with everyone at length. And, without going into like, we're drifting off topic a little bit, but I mean, the importance of that, of me flying to
Hmm.
Bogota, at a time when, this was over 10 years ago. So the FARC was still around, and my American friends were like, are you sure you should be going? Like, what does the department say? But it was such an enriching, and it created these relationships when they did become a customer. I knew who I was dealing with, and I remembered, going out, to dinner and to, joining them for their holiday Christmas party. There is in business, there's no substitute for an in-person exchange, especially when you're about to do business with,
Hmm.
and giving a performance is doing business with your audience. Like you
Right.
are exchanging this event, this
Yep.
experience. And
Hmm.
so I just don't think there will ever be, I mean, it's a tool, and we use the tool because we need to use the tool. And I've been
Hmm.
very, impressed. And yes, it's given me goosebumps to see some of these, folks doing the multicast, performance,
Hmm.
various people singing, playing musical instruments. It's beautiful to see that because it's demonstrating this coming together, and it's also, in my interpretation of it, saying, we would rather be together making this music, but we can't
Hmm.
right now, so this is what we're going to do.
Right. Well, and sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it.
No, I mean, I was just thinking, um, saying how the streaming and the digital version of these things, it's not the same as an in-person experience. And I know I've been reading articles where people are saying how all of these educators have had to move their classes online, and how exhausting it is to be teaching in that kind of medium, because you are so laser focused on everything that's going on your screen. Whereas if you were teaching in a classroom, there are so many nonverbal cues that you can pick up from body language and facial expressions and things like that. Whereas, I with a few colleagues of mine have been doing a online choral workshop over the last couple of weeks with students in Indiana. And you've got all these little boxes of faces, or just, a box with a name in it, because, there's no video there. And so it's very hard to read that energy. It's a completely different kind of energy.
Yeah.
So I am, I mean, I said it before, I am just itching for the moment that we all get back in the rehearsal room together. to make some sounds together. It's gonna be pretty powerful. I hope we can make it through.
Yeah, I think that when we all do come back together, there's going to be a huge interest in these kinds of things. Going to a live performance. Gathering with people, having dinner together. I mean, just being out in other people's. Humans are sort of a herd, species. I mean,
We're a social
we're a
species.
social species. Yes, there are introverts and extroverts, but generally speaking, historically speaking, we work better when we are, together.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, let's just keep our fingers crossed that in Chicago and Illinois, those numbers of cases, that curve continues to flatten and bend and all of those wonderful things, so we can get back to the business of making art. I want to switch gears for just a second. My friend Amanda. Thanks, Amanda. Amanda Sidebottom, another singer colleague of mine. Really liking what's going on here. That's great. I wanted to switch gears for just a second and talk about this supernumerary business. Okay. So I want you, first of all, to explain for our folks watching and listening, what is a supernumerary?
A supernumerary is defined as a background artist.
Okay.
Sometimes the background artist appears in the foreground. And so they're background artists who also can appear in the foreground. And they play a central role in the production in opera.
Okay.
Yes, they're, you hear, oh, what are you? Is that like an extra? Supernumerary? Is that like an extra? Oh, so you're like carrying a spear. And I have carried a spear before.
Yes, I have seen.
But, my very first opera was 20 years ago.
Yes. Okay. So let's just take a second. And just to clarify, so you have been a supernumerary with lyric since then?
I've been only with lyric.
Only with lyric. Okay. So lyric opera in Chicago. How in the world did this get on your radar?
Yeah, it's a great story. So I had moved back to Chicago after college. I had lived overseas for a couple of years. And so when I came back to Chicago as a young man, I was trying to sort of figure out my way in the world, and I was, starting to work, and my mother, she had called me up and said, she wanted to take out a subscription at Lyric Opera, and she wanted to know if I'd be willing to go in on it and be her date, and I was like, sure, I'd never been to the opera before. And so that was, so we started going to the opera, and she had heard about a backstage tour that Lyric still does. And so it's usually on the weekend, it's like a Saturday or Sunday, and they have a boxed lunch and they take you backstage, and you go through the wardrobe, wigs and makeup. There's usually somebody from the chorus giving a little sort of tour of their dressing rooms and what they how they operate backstage. And then you go down into the pit, and then you come back up onto the stage to see all the scrims and the lighting, and you look out into the dark house, and I swear, when I looked out into the house, something just said to me, like, very powerfully, you need to find a way to be on stage when the house is full. And it wasn't like I needed to be all of a sudden become a performer. I didn't want to be like at the center of attention. I just wanted to be a part, be there on stage in this retelling of the myth called opera. So I had no idea if this was even possible, but I knew somebody, a friend who I thought would know. She worked at the Art Institute. And so I called her up. I said, do you know do they ever like cast like extras for like the opera? And she's like, yeah, I think they do. There's like an audition hotline. Sure enough, there's a number still you can call, Lyric Opera, and it's their audition hotline. And there was an audition coming up for Attila, Attila, Verdi
Mhm.
opera, which is going to be coming back for the first time in 20 years this season at Lyric Opera.
Oh, wow.
And I said, okay. And it was like coming up like the following week. I'm like, I'm going to go to the audition. It was like 6 o'clock at night. And I was like, okay. So I show up. They were looking to cast, I think like 12 men and like maybe 10 women.
Hmm.
And I walk in. And by the way, at that time, they were paying $5 per call. So $5 for a rehearsal, $5 for a performance. So I walk in, I'm thinking, who's going to want to do this? I walk into the room 200. There were over 100 men auditioning for these, say, 12 roles.
Oh my gosh.
But I just had a feeling that I was going to get picked. I'm like, you know what? Don't be down about this. Like your chances, you walk in, you're like, okay, my chances of being cast have fallen dramatically. But I was like, no, it's going to be impossible. So they needed people to play barbarians, Huns.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
this was one of Sam Raimi's.
Oh, yeah.
He owned Attila, and he was in his prime, maybe, he was awesome. So part of this was there was a scene where they needed to do some stage combat. And so they asked, all of us if we had ever done stage combat. And I don't think anybody raised their hand. And then they said, well, what about like martial arts? And I had taken judo and taekwondo. And I was like, well, I've done that, And they said, okay, so they wanted us to do some like practice falls and what would it be like if you fell and to fall safely? And then I got cast. So this was my first opera experience, and I was hooked as a result of this.
Wow.
In Verdi's opera Attila, there's a prologue. I think it's around a 3-minute prologue where it's largely musical. I think there might be some humming or groaning from the men's chorus on stage, but this is the sacking of Aquileia, this town in northern Italy. And there were 6 of us, 3 men, 3 women, who were the action. So it was the scene is called the raping and pillaging scene of Aquileia. Like, wow. Attila's pulling his forces out, and we were the straggler Huns who were trying to rape a few women and kill a few more people on the way out.
Oh my gosh.
So that they centered me in the center of the stage. So imagine may you get what you want, and may you want what you get.
Yes. No, I got to stop you for 1 second. So how long after this tour, backstage tour?
It was a couple weeks.
A couple weeks.
Yeah. Yeah. So we had rehearsed. We had this fight scene. So I was attempting to rape this woman on stage. On stage. The curtain comes up, and the minute it comes up, we're starting to do our thing. And it's all choreographed to the music. So at a certain point in the music, I'm trying to like get her and take her clothes off and throw it onto the ground. She kicks me in the groin. I exaggerated, like, I go down, and I'm like sort of groveling on the ground, and she is going to help her other friend, stage right, who's about to be raped by this other guy.
Wow. And
then in a certain point in the music, I start to recover. And as I recover, I'm taking a dagger out of my waistband. It was a real knife too, dull blade, but still, it was real. And as I lift it out, at that moment, she is supposed to be, and she did. We had this rehearsed because we rehearsed it every night before the curtain came up. So we did a dry run of it. So at a certain point, I'm pulling out my dagger. She gets pushed into me. I stab her not once, but twice, do a little twist with the knife.
Yeah.
She dies. I drag her off stage, caveman style, do a quick change, become a refugee. The tenor had the popolo, the people like, we're going to get our land back. So I came out there to fill in that scene. And then I did another quick change to going back to the Hun to help Sam Raimi in a scene where Attila, he comes out and he's singing while we put his armor on.
Oh my God.
This was, if not the best, but one of the top 3 operas I've been in over a 20-year period. I mean, it was amazing incredible. To be, the curtain comes up in front of like 3,300 people, and it's you and 5 other people. So yeah,
Right.
I was hooked after that.
That's incredible. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I love that. And all for $5.
All for $5. We did get a pay raise.
You got a pay raise. Okay.
We got a pay raise. It's like 5 years later, 6 years later, and it went to 15, and it's
Okay.
been at 15 ever since.
All right. So for any of you who are looking for a side hustle, once things get back to normal, consider being a supernumerary, or a super, as some are called. Yes. Oh my gosh, I love that. Well, Dan, we only have a few minutes left today, but before we wrap up, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for taking time today. This has been super fun. It's been great to catch up. And I also want to say thank you for taking a chance all those years ago. It seems like ages ago, but it was only 4 or 4. But thank you for taking a chance, taking a risk, and saying yes.
Yeah, and I just want to say, it was a great experience to be on the board, to be the board president, to be part of that inaugural season. It was stressful. As you can imagine, developing an audience from scratch, making sure that you had the funds to pay the band. And when you're starting something new, you cannot qualify for things like grants. I don't think a lot of people know that. So you have to be able to stand on your own 2 feet, which is really hard to do. If you think about and we got into all those details of, the space rental, being able to pay the musicians and, all the other little things that come up. I mean, those are your big expenses, not to mention the rehearsing and the curating, putting together the program, flying Ruben in, and he is a huge part of what makes this organization click.
Absolutely.
And so it was a heavy lift, but when I look back on that experience, and especially that Third Coast Baroque is still here and is even able to support its artists during this unprecedented time in America's history is a huge thing. It's a huge testament to this organization. And I have mentioned this to you before, how proud I am. I did my part to get the thing off the ground, and I had, my things about putting butts in the seats. And, I'll never forget too, we had a board member who was sort of incredulous about our ability to get a corporate sponsor, which made me feel like, they're like, well, who's gonna, nobody knows who we are. And, I don't remember, we might not even have done our first concert series. And I'm like, we're gonna get a corporate sponsor. And I started calling around. And people were just like, well, I give to this and that. And I'm like, well, no, you give to this. Well, what have you guys done? What, and I finally got MB Bank.
Right.
I was a customer there, and I like to go into the bank. I know this is out of fashion, but I actually like to go into the bank, say hello to people maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks. And this bank was close to where I work, so I would just pop in and got to know them. And I was like, and that helped get us our first corporate sponsorship. I think it was like $150, but if you remember, we did the whole photo with the shaking hands, like with the. So it was also just speaking to dare to believe that this is possible, and against all odds. And also, I think it's important to note that nobody goes into the business of singing or playing, classical or opera music as a way to like, oh yeah, this is going to be a great living. No, this is not. This is like, yeah, you think of the Renee Flemings out there, and of course there are a few people, but statistically, you'd be better off trying to become like a basketball player, Right.
I was going to say, like Major League Baseball, Major League Sports in general, like the odds are not in your favor starting out. And so to take a risk and to say yes and to take that first blind step that's huge.
Right. And I think it's important to just, I believe, and and I know this to be true because I've had enough conversations. I live with an opera singer. I mean, it is not, in a way, it's not a choice. I mean, yes, everything is a choice, but someone who is going to spend, starting off when they're a wee bairn and study music, let's just say, they are compelled by a force that is greater than themselves to do this. This is true. I mean, it's not like, oh, I just decided I wanted to be a singer because seemed like a good way to make a buck. No, no, they do it because it's a way to help them to understand the world in which we live. They do it through music. That's their language, and they want to share that. They want to express that, and that's, I think, something that all of these arts organizations need to make that part of their dialogue with their audiences, not just Third Coast Baroque. I think we actually do a pretty good job of that. But that this is vitally important to the artists to do this. It goes way beyond the livelihood. And it's also necessary for us as audience members to have art in our lives. I'll never forget Andrei Tarkovsky, the famous Russian filmmaker, was interviewed, probably it was like the 1970s, but it's on, I think you can find it on like YouTube. Yeah. And this was going on because he was frankly kind of like stymied in some of his artistic pursuits because he wanted to make these really high value art films. He just said, look, imagine a world without art, without visual art, without music, without poetry, fiction, just devoid of art. It would not be a place I don't think anyone would want to live.
Right.
So that's why these organizations are so important to survive and to thrive, and it's a great exchange, and it's necessary. Yeah. And so I really hope that Third Coast Baroque can continue doing what they do, and grow into the organization that they have been becoming over these past 4 years. Vitally important.
Well, thank you for that, Dan. I really appreciate you sharing those thoughts and that support. I agree. I agree. I think
I'll get off my soapbox.
No, that's fine. That's fine. But you brought up something that's very important about supporting these artists, because I mean, this is how artists make a living, and we can't do these live performances right now. And some people may know that since we had to postpone our April concerts, we are working on rescheduling them for the fall. Third Coast Baroque, the board did decide to distribute 50% of the artist's pay right now to help them get through this current crisis. And then we also did set up Third Coast Baroque Artist Support Fund recently, and any donation that is specified for this fund that goes directly to the artists. TCB is still pretty young. We don't have a whole lot of overhead and administrative costs at this point. But if you want to donate, you can go to thirdcoastbaroque.org/donate and just let us know that's where you want your donation to go to. And it's going to go a long way, because these artists are doing everything they can to make it through this crazy, crazy evolving time. But in the meantime, Dan, thank you.
You're welcome.
This has been super fun.
It's been great. And just the fact that you, as a small organization, that we have been able to set up an artist fund. And I can tell you, as the board president, and Angela and I have had some very intense conversations about budget and allocating budget over the years. There is no fat on the bone at TCB. And in addition to there being no fat on the bone, I think it's just super commendable that we've set up this artist fund, that you've set up this artist fund. It's just another way, like any support that anyone is able to give to Third Coast Baroque, I can assure you, as the board president emeritus, is going straight into the livelihood of the organization and their artists. There's really no wasted resources at Third Coast Baroque, and Angela has been doing such a yeoman's job of all of the web stuff. I mean, the audience development, the planning for these things, it's like there's a certain part of this business is like meeting planning, event planning, special event, concert planning, and in doing that, and a great fundraiser. I mean, you were the #1 fundraiser in our first year, which, so
you gotta ask, you don't know until you ask, which is why I asked you.
So that is just, I think it's just great that you've been able to do this artist fund, and that you were able to give your artists who are not able, who were forced to postpone the concert, 50% of their pay. We both know so many people who are musicians and artists, and like people who are working at restaurants and bars, they have been completely cut off at the knees, like amputated immediately. And so many of these folks were already living, really paycheck to paycheck. I mean, so many people we both know right now are struggling, seriously struggling financially. So if there's anybody out there tuning into this who is able to give a little bit, I know that you're probably struggling too, but it would be deeply and most humbly appreciated, and it will go directly to our artists.
Thank you so much, Dan. I really appreciate that. And I know our artists do too. I think with that, we're going to wrap up for today. Thank you again for joining me today and making the time in the cold and snow up there.
It was a true honor and privilege.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody who's tuned in today live. And if you're watching this after the live feed, you can find us at thirdcoastbaroque.org. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. So follow, subscribe, do all the social media things that need to be done. And we're really looking forward to being back with you soon in the concert hall. But until then, we'll be back here on Tuesday with another Meet the Artist episode with Brandon Aker, our resident plucker, and he'll be talking about lutes and theorbos and tigers. Oh my, I don't know. Maybe we'll do a little tiger. Yeah, awesome. All right, well, thank you so much. Oh my gosh, before we go, my high school choir teacher just popped on. Hi, Mrs. Cruzy. Look what happens with life. It's amazing. Anyway, all right, everybody, you take care, and Dan, we'll talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Vive